Welcome to Manuela's Story Library, where every story finds a home. Tonight, dear friends, I'm taking you back to a time when jazz filled the smoky air, when love was forbidden, and when promises were whispered in the shadows. Picture New York City, 1920, a city of glittering speakeasies and dangerous secrets, where the powerful ruled the night and love could be the most dangerous gamble of all. Meet Victoria Sinclair, a refined young widow from high society with striking gray-green eyes and a secret that could destroy her. For 3 years, she's been the hidden wife of the most feared man in Manhattan. And then there's Dante Moretti, the commanding Italian mafia boss who owns half the city's underground, a man whose dark eyes once looked at her with a love so fierce it could move mountains. Their marriage was a secret, stolen moments in hidden apartments, passionate embraces behind closed doors, a love that burned bright, but always in the shadows. But here's what will break your heart and keep you listening until the very last word. When Dante is shot and wakes up in a hospital bed with no memory of who he is, he looks at the woman he once called his everything and asks, "Who are you?" Just like that, 3 years of love, of promises, of secret vows, erased. And his powerful family, who never wanted Vittoria in the first place, sees their chance to make her disappear forever. Now, with a beautiful rival circling like a vulture and Dante's memories locked away, Vittoria must decide. Does she fight for a man who doesn't remember loving her? Or does she walk away from the only love she's ever known? This is a story about memories the mind forgets, but the heart never does. This is the story of Vittoria and Dante. Stay with me, because what happens next will move you in ways you never expected. The rain hammered against the windows of St. Vincent Hospital as Victoria Sinclair rushed through the sterile corridors, her emerald green silk dress clinging to her trembling frame, her carefully pinned waves now falling loose around her shoulders. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. 3 hours ago, she'd been sitting in their secret Chelsea apartment, reading by the window, when the phone call came. "Mrs. Moretti, there's been an incident." Mrs. Moretti. The name she could only use in whispers, never in public, never in daylight. The name that meant everything to her and nothing to the rest of the world. "He's asking for you," the voice had said. But when Vittoria burst into the private room on the 5th floor, her hands clutching the pearl necklace at her throat, what she found was worse than death itself. Dante lay propped against white pillows, his powerful frame looking diminished beneath hospital blankets, a thick bandage wrapped around his head. Those intense dark eyes that once burned with recognition and desire, now empty. Completely empty. "Dante?" she breathed, moving toward him, her voice breaking on his name. He turned his head slowly, studying her face the way one might study a stranger on the street. His brow furrowed. Those lips that had whispered "Ti amo" against her skin 1,000 times parted, and he said the words that shattered her world into a million irreparable pieces. "Who are you?" The room spun. Vittoria grabbed the edge of the bed to steady herself, her knuckles turning white. "Dante, it's me. It's Vittoria." Nothing, not a flicker of recognition. Not a spark of the love that had burned between them for 3 beautiful, secret years. "I'm sorry, miss," he said, his voice polite but distant, so terribly distant. "Have we met before? Were you employed by my family?" Employed. The word cut through her like a blade. This man had held her in his arms just 2 nights ago, had whispered that she was his reason for breathing, had traced the lines of her face and promised her forever. And now he looked at her like she was a stranger. A nurse appeared in the doorway. "I'm sorry, but family only right now. Mr. Moretti needs rest." "I am family," Vittoria said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I'm his—" "She can go," a cold voice interrupted from behind her. Lorenzo Moretti, Dante's uncle, stood in the doorway, his gray-streaked hair slicked back, a cigar between his thick fingers, his dark eyes full of triumph that made Vittoria's blood run cold. "The lady was just leaving. Weren't you Miss Sinclair?" "Miss?" "Not Mrs. Moretti." Never Mrs. Moretti. Not to them. Vittoria looked back at Dante, desperate, searching his face for anything. A memory, a feeling, a ghost of what they'd shared. But there was only confusion there, and something worse. Nothing at all. "I'll come back," she whispered, though her voice broke on the words. "I'll come back tomorrow." Lorenzo stepped aside to let her pass, and as she walked by, he leaned close enough that only she could hear. "Don't bother. My nephew doesn't need complications from his past, especially not from women with improper connections to our family. Improper connections. As if their marriage, their sacred, secret marriage, was nothing but a scandal to be erased." Vittoria walked down those hospital corridors with her head held high, even as tears streamed down her porcelain cheeks, even as her entire world crumbled around her. She'd lost her first husband to illness 3 years ago, and everyone had said she'd never love again, that she'd become one of those tragic young widows who wore black forever. But then she'd met Dante at a charity gala, and he'd looked at her across a crowded room with those dark, intense eyes, and she'd felt alive again for the first time in so long. Their courtship had been secret. A mafia boss couldn't be seen pursuing a society widow, not openly. But their love had been real. So devastatingly real. The rain had turned to a downpour by the time Vittoria emerged onto the street. She stood there, letting it soak through her expensive dress, not caring anymore about propriety or appearance. A black Cadillac pulled up, and Tommy, one of Dante's loyal drivers who knew about their marriage, jumped out with an umbrella. "Mrs. Moretti, please, get in," he said gently, his weathered face full of sympathy. "He doesn't remember me, Tommy." Her voice was hollow. "He looked right through me." "I know, ma'am. I heard." Tommy opened the car door. "But memories can come back. The doctors said there's hope." Hope. Such a fragile, dangerous thing. That night, in the Chelsea apartment that had been their sanctuary, Vittoria stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by their life together. The cream-colored walls held no photographs. They'd been too careful for that. But every inch of this place held memories. The velvet sofa where they'd spent countless evenings, his head in her lap while she read to him. The window seat where they'd watched snowfall last winter, wrapped in each other's arms. The bed where he'd made love to her with a tenderness that contradicted everything the world thought they knew about Dante Moretti. She pulled open a drawer and found what she was looking for. A single photograph, the only one they'd ever dared take. It had been taken by a trusted friend on their wedding day 3 years ago. Vittoria in a simple cream dress, Dante in a dark suit, no elaborate ceremony, no guests, just them and their vows spoken in this very room. In the photograph, he was looking at her with such love, such absolute devotion, that it had taken her breath away then, and it broke her heart now. "How do I reach you?" she whispered to the photograph, touching his face through the glass. "How do I make you remember that you loved me?" A knock at the door made her jump. She quickly hid the photograph and opened the door to find Maria, an elderly woman who cleaned the building and who had been the only witness to their secret happiness. "Miss Vittoria," Maria said, her Italian accent thick with concern. "I heard what happened. The whole neighborhood knows Mr. Moretti was shot. He's alive," Vittoria said, though the words felt meaningless. "But he doesn't remember anything." "He doesn't remember us." Maria crossed herself. "The heart remembers what the mind forgets, child. My grandmother used to say this. Don't give up." But giving up felt so much easier than fighting. Because how do you fight for someone who doesn't know you're supposed to be fighting together? The next morning, Vittoria returned to the hospital, dressed impeccably in a charcoal gray dress with a matching cloche hat, her armor against the world. But when she reached Dante's floor, she found her path blocked by 2 large men in dark suits, Lorenzo's men. "Mr. Moretti isn't receiving visitors," one of them said. "I'm not a visitor. I'm his..." "His what?" The voice came from behind the guards. Isabella Rossini emerged from Dante's room, her copper-red hair perfectly waved, her red lips curved in a victorious smile, her green eyes calculating and cold. She wore a black dress with gold sequins that caught the light, expensive and flashy in a way that screamed new money trying to look like old power. Isabella was the daughter of Carlo Rossini, head of a rival crime family. For years, there had been talk of uniting the families through marriage, but Dante had refused, because he was already married. To Vittoria. His friend? Isabella continued, her tone dripping with false sweetness. How kind of you to be concerned. But as you can see, Dante has all the care he needs. His family is arranging everything. In fact, Lorenzo suggested I visit regularly. Dante and I have so much history to catch up on. The implication was clear. With Dante's memory gone, they were rewriting history. And in this new version, Vittoria didn't exist. May I see him? Just for a moment? Vittoria kept her voice steady, refusing to give Isabella the satisfaction of seeing her break. The doctor says he needs rest, and no confusion. Seeing strangers claiming to know him might be distressing. Isabella's smile widened. I'm sure you understand. Vittoria stood there, her hands clenched at her sides, her emerald ring, the ring Dante had placed on her finger 3 years ago, hidden beneath her glove. She wanted to scream, to show them the marriage certificate she kept locked in a safe deposit box, to tear down this wall of lies. But what good would it do if Dante himself didn't remember? If he looked at her with those empty eyes and saw nothing? She turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the polished hospital floors, each step an act of will. But she didn't leave the building. Instead, she found a nurse's station on a different floor and waited until the shift changed at 8 o'clock that evening. Then she approached a young nurse who looked kind. I need to see Dante Moretti, Vittoria said. Just for 5 minutes, please. He was important to me. Something in Vittoria's voice, some raw desperation, made the nurse soften. 3rd floor, private room at the end of the hall. But you didn't hear it from me. Vittoria's heart raced as she climbed the stairs, avoiding the elevators where guards might be stationed. The hallway was dimmer at this hour, most of the lights turned down for the evening. She reached his door and paused, her hand on the handle, terrified of what she might find on the other side. She pushed it open softly. Dante was awake, sitting up in bed, staring out the rain-streaked window at the glittering lights of Manhattan. He looked tired, the bandage still wrapped around his head, his strong jaw shadowed with stubble. He turned when he heard her enter, and for just a fraction of a second, she thought, she hoped. She saw something flicker in those dark eyes. You're the woman from yesterday, he said, not unkindly, just observing. Vittoria, right? Yes. She stepped closer, her heart in her throat. May I sit? He gestured to the chair beside his bed. Vittoria sat, close enough to see the confusion in his eyes, close enough to catch the familiar scent of his cologne, the scent that had been on her skin countless times. They told me you're just an acquaintance, Dante said, studying her face. Someone I met at social functions. But... He paused, his brow furrowing. When you walked in yesterday, I felt... something. I can't explain it. It's like my body recognized you even though my mind doesn't. Vittoria's breath caught. Hope, that dangerous, beautiful thing, fluttered in her chest like a caged bird. What did you feel? She whispered. Dante looked down at his hands, strong hands that had once held her so tenderly. Safe. I felt safe. And that doesn't make sense because I don't know you. He looked up at her, and there was something vulnerable in his eyes that reminded her so much of the man she'd fallen in love with. Who are you, really? To me? This was the moment. She could tell him everything. That she was his wife. That they'd shared 3 years of hidden love. That every promise he'd ever made had been made to her. But looking at his confused, lost expression, at the bandage wrapping his head, at the man who'd been torn away from everything he knew, she couldn't. Not like this. Not when he might think she was just another person trying to manipulate him, trying to claim a piece of the powerful Dante Moretti. I was, she began, choosing her words carefully. I was someone you cared about. Before the accident. Cared about? He leaned forward slightly. Were we together? Yes? The word came out barely louder than a breath. We were. Dante was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face as if trying to find the memories hidden there. Why isn't my family telling me this? Because they never approved. Vittoria's voice was steady now, stronger. Your Uncle Lorenzo, your cousins, they wanted you to marry someone who would strengthen business alliances, not someone like me. Someone like you? He repeated. What does that mean? Someone from outside your world. Someone they saw as a complication. Dante's jaw tightened, and for just a moment, she saw a flash of the man she knew. Protective, defiant, refusing to let anyone dictate his choices. I don't remember my life before I woke up in this bed, but I know one thing. I don't let other people make my decisions for me. Vittoria smiled, sad and small. No, you never did. A noise in the hallway made them both freeze. Voices, Lorenzo's deep rumble and Isabella's higher, affected laugh. You need to go, Dante said urgently. If they find you here. I know. Vittoria stood, smoothing her dress. But before she left, she did something bold, something she knew she might regret. She pulled off her right glove, revealing the emerald ring on her finger, and held her hand where he could see it. You gave me this, she said softly. 3 years ago, and you told me it matched my eyes, and that every time you looked at it, you'd remember your promise. What promise? Dante's voice was rough, almost desperate. That you'd love me, in this life and the next, in memory and in forgetting. Forever. The door handle turned. Vittoria slipped out through the adjoining bathroom just as Lorenzo and Isabella entered the main room. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought they must hear it through the walls. She waited, barely breathing, until she heard them leave, and then she slipped out into the night. But she'd done it. She'd planted a seed. And seeds, given time and care, could grow into something beautiful. Days turned into a week. Vittoria watched from the shadows as Dante was released from the hospital and brought back to the Moretti mansion in Upper East Side, that imposing brownstone with its burgundy curtains and marble floors where she'd never been welcome, not even when she'd been his wife. She watched as Isabella arrived each afternoon in her flashy dresses and expensive furs, all smiles and batting eyelashes. She watched as Lorenzo carefully controlled who had access to Dante, spinning a version of his life that didn't include her. But Vittoria also learned things. She had friends in unexpected places, servants who'd seen her and Dante together, drivers who'd been sworn to secrecy, bartenders from the Velvet Rose speakeasy who knew the truth. They brought her information. They told her that Dante was having dreams, strange and vivid dreams of a woman with gray-green eyes. They told her he'd asked about a Chelsea apartment his family claimed not to know about. They told her he kept touching his left ring finger where his wedding band used to sit, a band he'd worn on a chain around his neck, a band that was now mysteriously missing. One night, nearly 2 weeks after the shooting, Vittoria received an unsigned note slipped under her apartment door. The Velvet Rose, midnight, alone. The Velvet Rose was Dante's speakeasy, the crown jewel of his empire, hidden beneath a barbershop in Lower Manhattan. Vittoria had been there many times, always through the secret entrance, always protected. But showing up alone at midnight, with Dante's memory gone and his family hostile? It was dangerous. It was reckless. She went anyway. The jazz music hit her the moment she descended the hidden stairs. Saxophone and trumpet weaving through the smoky air, the singer's voice low and sultry. The underground club was packed as always. Elegant men in tailored suits and women in beaded dresses, all of them there to drink illegal liquor and forget the world above. And there, at the back table in a burgundy velvet booth, sat Dante. He was alone, watching the entrance as if he'd been waiting for her. He wore a charcoal 3-piece suit, no bandage now, his dark hair slicked back, and he looked every inch the powerful man he'd always been. But his eyes, those dark, intense eyes, held something new. Uncertainty. Questions. Vittoria crossed the room, feeling every pair of eyes that turned to watch her, the green-eyed widow in an elegant black dress, walking through the lion's den. "You came," Dante said when she reached his table. He stood, ever the gentleman, and gestured for her to sit. "You sent for me," Vittoria replied, sliding into the booth across from him. "I needed to see you. Away from my uncle, away from Isabella, away from everyone who keeps telling me who I'm supposed to be." He poured her a glass of champagne from the bottle on the table. The good stuff, the real French champagne he kept in reserve. "I've been having these dreams. Every night since you visited me in the hospital." Vittoria's hand trembled slightly as she took the glass. "What kind of dreams?" "Of you." His voice was low, meant only for her in this crowded, noisy room. "Of this place. Of an apartment with cream walls and silk curtains. Of your laugh. Of the way your eyes look in candlelight. Of moments I can't quite grasp, but that feel more real than anything I experience when I'm awake." "Dante, I went to Chelsea," he interrupted. "I found the apartment. I had a key to it in my personal safe, hidden where my uncle couldn't find it. I went there, and the moment I walked through that door, I felt like I'd come home." "Explain that to me, Vittoria. Explain how a place I don't remember can feel more like home than the mansion I supposedly grew up in." Vittoria set down her glass before she dropped it. This was it. The moment she'd been praying for and terrified of in equal measure. "Because it was our home," she said simply. "Yours and mine. For 3 years, that apartment was where we could be ourselves. Where you weren't Dante Moretti, feared boss of the Italian mob, and I wasn't the society widow everyone whispered about. We were just us." "Were we married?" The question came out raw, almost pleading. "Yes." Vittoria pulled the chain from beneath her dress, revealing the matching wedding band she wore. Simple gold, inscribed with their initials and the date. 3 years ago, in that apartment, with only one witness. Your family never knew. Or rather, they suspected but could never prove it. Until now. Until you forgot. Dante reached across the table and took the ring in his fingers, reading the inscription. His hand was shaking. "Why didn't you tell me this in the hospital?" "Because I was afraid. Afraid you'd think I was just another person trying to use you. Afraid that without your memories, you wouldn't believe me. Afraid that I'd lose you all over again if I pushed too hard." He looked up at her, and in his eyes, she saw the beginning of something. Not quite memory, but something deeper. Recognition, perhaps, or maybe just the echo of what they'd once been. "I don't remember loving you," he said, and the words cut even though his tone was gentle. "But I look at you, and I feel like I'm supposed to. Like there's this gravitational pull between us that makes no sense unless what you're saying is true." He turned her hand over in his, tracing the lines of her palm. "Tell me about us. Tell me everything." And so she did. There in the velvet rose, with jazz music swelling around them and the smoke of cigars creating halos in the amber light, Vittoria told him their story. She told him about the charity gala where they'd met, how he'd asked her to dance and they'd talked until dawn. She told him about their careful courtship, stolen moments in parks and museums where they could blend in with crowds. She told him about the night he'd proposed, how he'd been so nervous his hands had shaken. This powerful man who feared nothing, suddenly terrified she might say no. She told him about their wedding, simple and perfect and just theirs, about the promises they'd made, about the life they'd built in the shadows, protected and secret, and so very real. "We talked about telling your family," Vittoria said, her voice thick with emotion. "You wanted to. You were planning to, right before the shooting. You said you were tired of hiding. Tired of pretending I wasn't the most important person in your world." Dante was quiet for a long moment, absorbing it all. Then he said something that surprised her. "I believe you." "You do?" "I do. Because everything you've told me explains the pieces that don't fit. the dreams, the apartment. This feeling I have whenever you're near, like I'm supposed to be protecting you, holding you, loving you." He paused. "There's just one problem. Your family," Vittoria finished. "My family, Isabella. The entire structure of my life that's been built around the assumption that I'm unattached and available for a marriage alliance with the Rossinis." Dante's jaw tightened. "Lorenzo has been pushing for an engagement announcement. Says it would stabilize the families, prevent conflicts." "I know." Vittoria had heard the rumors. In another few days, Lorenzo planned to announce Dante and Isabella's engagement at a major family gathering. Once that happened, even if Dante's memory returned, backing out would mean war between the families. "I won't do it," Dante said firmly. "I may not remember our life together, but I trust what my gut is telling me. And my gut says that you're telling me the truth, that what we had was real, and that I'd be a damn fool to let you go." Hope bloomed in Vittoria's chest, warm and terrifying. "So what do we do?" Dante smiled then, really smiled, and it was the first time since he'd woken up that he'd looked like himself. "We fight, together. The way I'm guessing we've always done." They left the Velvet Rose together that night, not caring who saw them, not hiding anymore. Dante took her hand as they walked through the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan, and even though he didn't remember all the times they'd walked these same streets before, his hand fit around hers like it always had, perfectly, protectively, like it was meant to be there. But their happiness was short-lived. The next morning, Lorenzo stormed into Dante's office at the family shipping company, his face red with fury. "You were seen with that woman last night. Half the city is talking about it." "Good," Dante said calmly, not looking up from the ledger he was reviewing. "Let them talk." "Good?" Lorenzo slammed his hand on the desk. "You're supposed to be courting Isabella Rossini, securing our alliance with her family. Instead, you're gallivanting around with some society widow who means nothing? Watch your tone when you speak about my wife." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Lorenzo went very still. "Your what?" "My wife. Vittoria Sinclair is my wife. Has been for 3 years." Dante stood, coming around the desk to face his uncle. "I may not remember everything yet, but I know that much. And I'm done hiding it." Lorenzo's face went through several shades of red and purple. "You can't be serious. You married that woman without the family's approval? Without considering what it means for our alliances?" "I considered what it meant for my life. My happiness." Dante's voice was hard as steel. "And I chose her. I choose her still." "Ah, then you're a fool. That marriage is meaningless if we don't recognize it. And we won't. You'll marry Isabella as planned, and we'll forget this unfortunate lapse in judgment." "No." The single word was delivered with such finality that even Lorenzo faltered. "I'm still the head of this family," Dante continued. "I may have lost my memory, but I haven't lost my authority. And I say the engagement to Isabella is off. Vittoria is my wife, publicly now, and anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly." "You'll start a war," Lorenzo warned. "The Rossinis won't take this insult lightly. Then we deal with it. But I won't betray the woman I love, even if I can't remember loving her, just to make things convenient for you." The confrontation sent shockwaves through both families. Isabella, humiliated and furious, convinced her father that this was an unforgivable slight. The Rossinis began making moves. Subtle at first, then bolder. Shipments went missing. Businesses were pressured. The careful peace that had existed between the families began to crack. And through it all, Dante stood firm, with Vittoria by his side. She moved back into the Chelsea apartment, and he came to her there every night after dealing with the chaos of his days. They would sit together in the living room, and she would tell him stories of their past, showing him photographs, letters he'd written her, small mementos of their life together. And slowly, like spring thawing winter, pieces of his memory began to return. First, it was small things. The way she took her coffee, the song she hummed while reading, the exact spot behind her ear that made her shiver when he kissed it. Then, larger pieces. Their wedding night, the first time he'd brought her to the Velvet Rose, a trip they'd taken to the coast where they'd watched the sunrise and talked about the future they'd have when they could finally be open about their love. One night, about a month after he'd first woken in that hospital bed, Dante came home to the apartment looking shaken. Vittoria looked up from her book, immediately concerned. "What happened?" "I remembered," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I remembered everything." Vittoria stood slowly, her heart pounding. "Everything?" "The shooting. Lorenzo set it up." Dante's fists clenched at his sides. "I'd told him that morning that I was going to announce our marriage publicly, that I was done hiding. He couldn't have that, couldn't lose control of me, couldn't lose the Rossini alliance. So he arranged for Rossini's men to ambush me, make it look like a random attack. He thought the amnesia was a gift, a chance to rewrite history without me." Horror and rage warred in Vittoria's chest. "Your own family tried to kill you? Not family." Dante crossed the room to her, taking her face in his hands. "You're my family. You've always been my family. And I remember now. I remember loving you with everything in me. And I remember that even when I couldn't remember, some part of me still knew, still reached for you." Tears streamed down Vittoria's face as she threw her arms around him, holding him tight, feeling his arms wrap around her the way they had 1,000 times before, but also as if for the first time. "I thought I'd lost you forever," she whispered against his chest. "Never," he murmured into her hair. "In this life and the next, in memory and in forgetting, forever. That's what I promised you, and I meant it." They held each other in that cream-colored room where they'd first spoken their vows, and it felt like coming full circle, like the universe had tested them and found their love strong enough to survive even the cruelest trials. But there was still the matter of Lorenzo and the Rossinis to handle. Dante gathered evidence of his uncle's betrayal, payments, messages, witnesses who'd been too afraid to speak before. He called a meeting of the entire family and several rival bosses, a gathering of power that would determine the future of the New York underworld. The meeting took place in the grand ballroom of the Moretti mansion, that same mansion where Vittoria had never been welcome. But she was there that night, standing beside Dante in a stunning emerald gown that matched her ring, matching her eyes, her head held high as every eye in the room turned to watch them enter. Dante didn't mince words. He laid out the evidence of Lorenzo's treachery, of the attempted murder, of the manipulation and lies. The room erupted in chaos, accusations, denials, threats. But Dante's voice cut through it all, strong and unwavering. "Lorenzo acted not for the family, but for his own power. He tried to kill me, tried to erase the woman I love, tried to force me into a marriage that would have served his ambitions rather than the family's true interests." Dante's dark eyes swept the room. "The question now is, who leads this family going forward? Someone who operates through betrayal? Or someone who, even without his memories, knew the value of love and loyalty?" One by one, the men in the room made their choice. They voted, and when the final count was tallied, Lorenzo had lost. He was stripped of his position, exiled from the family businesses, left with nothing but his bitterness and greed. Carlo Rossini stood then, his face unreadable. "You've humiliated my daughter, rejected her publicly. That demands a response." The room went silent, everyone waiting for the declaration of war. But then Rossini did something unexpected. He smiled. "However, I'm also a businessman, and I can see when to cut my losses. You were never going to marry Isabella, with or without memory. Better we know that now than after a wedding that would have been a sham." He extended his hand. "Peace between our families, Moretti. On the condition that you never pull something like this again." It wasn't the warm reconciliation Vittoria had hoped for, but it was peace. And in their world, peace was often the best you could hope for. After the meeting, after the handshakes and the tense negotiations, after the last guest had left and the mansion had fallen quiet, Dante took Vittoria's hand and led her through the empty hallways to the library, the same library where his family had held countless meetings without her, made countless decisions about his life without consulting his heart. "This is our home now," he said, gesturing to the grand room with its floor-to-ceiling shelves and burgundy furniture. "No more hiding. No more secret apartments. You're my wife and everyone knows it, and I want you here, in every room of this house, making it ours." Vittoria looked around the opulent library, then back at Dante. "I liked our little apartment. It was ours in a way this place never could be. Then we keep it," Dante said with a smile. "Keep it as our sanctuary, our private place. But we also build a life here, out in the open, together." He pulled her close, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, strong and steady and real. "Do you remember what you said to me the night you proposed?" Vittoria asked softly. "I said a lot of things that night," Dante replied, amusement in his voice. "You said that loving me was the first truly brave thing you'd ever done. That everything else, running the family, facing down rivals, surviving in this violent world, all of that was easy compared to opening your heart." Dante tilted her chin up so he could look into her gray-green eyes. "I was right. And the bravest thing I've done was trust my heart even when my mind couldn't remember why. When I looked at you in that hospital and felt something I couldn't explain, when I followed that feeling even though everyone told me not to. That was my heart remembering what my head had forgotten. I love you," Vittoria whispered. "I loved you when you knew me, and I loved you when you didn't, and I'll love you in every moment that comes after." "Ti amo," Dante replied, using the Italian words he'd whispered to her countless times. "In this life and the next, in memory and in forgetting. Forever." They kissed there in the library, in what was now their home, their kiss sealing a promise that had survived the ultimate test. Outside, the rain that had been threatening all evening finally began to fall, drumming against the windows in a rhythm that sounded almost like applause. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. It never was in their world. There would be challenges, dangers, moments when the life they'd chosen would test them again. But they had survived the worst thing imaginable, the loss of their shared history, the erasure of their love story. And they'd found their way back to each other anyway. Because some loves are too powerful to forget, too deep to erase. They live not just in memory, but in the spaces between heartbeats, in the instinct that draws two souls together even when logic says they shouldn't fit. They live in emerald rings and secret apartments, in jazz music and rainy Manhattan nights, in promises spoken in the shadows and honored in the light. Vittoria and Dante's love was one of those loves, the kind that writes itself into your very bones, that changes who you are at the most fundamental level. The kind of love that, even when faced with the impossible, finds a way. And as they stood together in that library, the New York skyline glittering beyond the rain-streaked windows, both of them knew with absolute certainty that this was only the beginning. They had the rest of their lives to create new memories, to build the future they'd always dreamed of, to prove every single day that they'd been right to fight for each other. In the weeks that followed, they fell into a new rhythm. Dante ran his empire with Vittoria by his side, not as a hidden secret, but as his partner, his counsel, the person whose opinion he valued above all others. She accompanied him to meetings, learned the intricacies of his businesses, and proved herself sharp-minded and strategic. The men who'd doubted her, who'd thought she was just a pretty society woman playing at being part of their world, learned quickly that she was so much more. At night, they would retreat to their Chelsea apartment, leaving behind the weight of the Moretti name and just being Vittoria and Dante again. They'd make dinner together in the small kitchen, something they could never do in the mansion with its staff of servants. They'd dance to the radio, his hand on the small of her back, her head on his shoulder, moving slowly to jazz music that spoke of love and longing, And sometimes, Dante would stop in the middle of whatever they were doing, and he'd just look at her with wonder in his dark eyes. "What?" Vittoria would ask, smiling. "I'm just thinking about how close I came to losing this. To losing you." He'd pull her close. "How lucky I am that my heart was smarter than my head." One evening, 6 months after the shooting, they returned to the Velvet Rose. The speakeasy was as crowded as ever, but when Dante and Vittoria entered, the jazz band struck up their song, the one that had been playing the night they'd met, the night everything had changed. Dante led Vittoria to the dance floor, and they moved together with the ease of long practice, of two people who'd learned each other's rhythms long ago. Around them, the crowd parted, giving them space, and more than one person smiled at the sight of the notorious Dante Moretti, so obviously, utterly in love with his wife. "Happy," he murmured against her ear. "Impossibly so," Vittoria replied. "Sometimes I think I'm going to wake up and find out this is all a dream, that you're still in that hospital bed, looking at me with empty eyes." "Not a dream," Dante assured her. "This is real. We're real, and I'm never going to give you reason to doubt that again." As the song ended and the crowd applauded, Dante dipped Vittoria dramatically, making her laugh, that clear, joyful sound that had first captured his heart. When he pulled her back up, he kissed her right there in front of everyone, a declaration and a promise all at once. They'd started their love story in secret, built it in shadows, nearly lost it to violence and amnesia. But they'd fought their way back to each other, proved that what they had was worth any risk, any cost. And now, they had the rest of their lives to live that love out loud, in the light, exactly as they'd always wanted. As they left the Velvet Rose that night, hand in hand, walking through the Manhattan streets where their story had begun, Vittoria looked up at the man beside her, her husband, her love, her choice, and knew with absolute certainty that some stories are worth fighting for. This was theirs, and it was far from over. Well, dear friends, wasn't that a journey? A love so strong it survived even when memory tried to erase it. A woman brave enough to fight for the man she loved even when he didn't remember her. And a man whose heart knew the truth even when his mind couldn't recall it. If this story touched your heart, if you felt every moment of Vittoria's pain and Dante's confusion and their triumph in finding each other again, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling me what you think. Would you have fought for love the way Vittoria did? What was your favorite moment? And don't forget to subscribe to Manuela's Story Library, because where every story finds a home, and I have so many more tales to share with you. Hit that like button if you believe in love that transcends memory, and share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that the heart always remembers what truly matters. Until next time, dear friends, keep believing in love, keep believing in second chances, and remember, the best stories are the ones that remind us what we're capable of when we refuse to give up on the people we love. This is Manuela, and I'll see you in the next story.